What's happening? What's happening? What's happening?
And we're back!
That's right. Finally back again. JC's Pop Culture Pod back at it. Episode 9. Got several things we're going to jump into movie reviews for. Then we're going to talk some movie and TV news here right at the end. Wrap this up. It's kind of switching up the format a little bit. I know in the past it's been movie news and then kind of talking about what I've watched. But instead of, doing individual videos for these movie reviews, I figured, hey, let's make them, just part of the podcast. We'll use the podcast side of things here for the movie review side. So that's what we're going to do here on this shit. We're going to get into movie reviews. I got 5 movie reviews. I'm going to jump into stuff I've seen recently, some stuff I've seen a while back but haven't had a chance to talk about yet. I'm going to keep it spoiler free for Deadpool and Wolverine. That's what we're going to lead off with, and then I will get into some spoilers for the other movies that we're going to talk about. You probably see them there in the podcast title, whether you're listening on Spotify, whether you're watching on YouTube. I appreciate it either way. But let's jump in right away. Let's get into these reviews. Let's talk a little bit about Deadpool and Wolverine, obviously the movie of the summer, kind of the most anticipated movie for a lot of people. It was high on my list. It may have been number 1 on my most anticipated list, really. I know it was up there and shit, but definitely going to talk about it a little bit. Like I said, I'm going to keep it spoiler free here. So, if you don't want to hear anything about it, jump forward about, 5, 6, 7 minutes in this podcast, whatever. And, then you can get to the other stuff, but I'm not going to give away any spoilers. Not going to give away any of the cameos and stuff like a lot of motherfuckers are doing on the internet. I'm going to keep it spoiler free here, talking Deadpool and Wolverine, but Deadpool Wolverine, directed by Sean Levy, written by Ryan Reynolds, Rhett Reese, and Paul Wernick. Obviously, Ryan Reynolds, Hugh Jackman, the main stars. Slew of others. Not going to go into the cast list, obviously, for some reasons. You'll find that out once you watch it, of course. But spoiler-free thoughts, it's great, man. It's great. It's everything that you want. You get Deadpool and Wolverine together. You get Hugh Jackman as Wolverine in the comic-accurate suit. That's freaking awesome in and of itself. You get them teaming up together. You get multiple scenes of them fighting one another as well, and that shit's epic. And one of my favorite things from this movie is obviously going into it, one of the biggest concerns was, is Disney going to let Deadpool be Deadpool? Is this truly going to be rated R? 100%. It's just as vulgar as the first 2 Deadpools, maybe even more so. And I think that they said, hey, y'all don't think we're going to do this? Watch this shit. And they cranked the gore up on this thing, man. It was super gory, one of the more gory superhero movies I've seen. And this, if anything, to me, just solidifies we need more R-rated superhero movies. We need more gore. We need to let loose with this shit. Let these guys have fun. And you can see Ryan Reynolds was really having a ton of it. So was Hugh Jackman. Their chemistry together, awesome. The cameos in it, top notch, man. Well done, the things that they did with those, and didn't really feel like fan service. I mean, while it is, kind of fan service, right? A lot of the things in this movie, it served a point in the story. So that's always, a plus there. It's not just doing it for doing its sake, right? So if you're going to do that shit, at least that make it have a point, and they did. Really enjoyed it, guys. Laughed my ass off the whole movie. It's, surprisingly emotional as well. It kind of has a nice heart to it for the Deadpool character, kind of what he's going through in this movie. And not only is it that heart kind of ties it into his entry into the MCU as well. They kind of use both those things to tie one another together. So it's like the heart of the movie, but also, reminds fans, hey, this isn't, the Fox version anymore. This is now part of the Marvel universe and shit. So both those things work well together, I think. All in all, very solid movie. But there are a couple of things that, hold it back from being that perfect 10 for me of a movie. It's, up there in my yearly list. You'll have to find out where at the end of the year it ranks up there. Not going to spoil that end of year ranking list quite yet. Of course, that'll be out probably early January. But, this film is definitely going to be up near the top of that list. It's one of the best films of the year so far. So don't let what I say here hold you back from watching it. But for me, it's going to be a 9 out of 10. Like I said, just a few things that hold it back. I think for one is, something that's been a complaint with a lot of recent Marvel releases is the CG's not quite there in some parts. Some parts is really good. But then there's a few shots where you're going to say, oh, they could have worked on that. They could have made that look a little bit better. And, that has been the case. It's not god awful. We're not talking, The Flash, which, is a movie I loved. It was in my top 5 last year. But, it had the terrible CGI. It's not that level of bad, but there is still some spotty CGI in this movie. So that takes it down a little bit for me. And then the other thing for me is just kind of the story a little bit. Like I said, it does have some heart to it. But the bad thing for me is I feel like at the end of the movie, we're just kind of right back where we were at the beginning. Not too much has changed. Obviously, some things had to happen for him to go through to get to that place. But really, when you're taking in a movie, when you're taking in a story, you want something to change at the end. And really, it's not too much has changed at the end of this movie, I would argue. So for me, that kind of knocked it down another little half a point there. So that's why you get the 9 out of 10 instead of the 10 out of 10 that this could be. Is it my favorite of the Deadpool movies, though? Probably. It's definitely up there. If nothing else, it's tied with the original, but I think this would probably be my number one of the Deadpool movies. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. I'm not going to spoil the shit here for you, but there's a bunch of fun cameos in it as well. So 9 out of 10 for me on Deadpool and Wolverine. Now we're going to get into some spoiler territory. These next 4 movies I'm going to be talking about, I am going to be talking some brief spoilers in those. So fair warning here, spoilers lie ahead. But let's get into the Bikeriders, man. This is one I went and saw, a couple months back now in theaters. It was one I was excited for. You guys saw me do the trailer reaction on the channel probably. Sons of Anarchy, my favorite, television show of all time. I think it's the greatest television show of all time, probably the one I've seen the most of any TV shows. And so when I seen, the title, The Bikeriders, I've seen them on the bikes, I was like, that's right up my alley. But then, I found out it's in the time period of like back in the 60s. And I'm like, well, that's kind of like Grease, another movie that I grew up liking. So it's almost like the merging of those two things. No musical aspect and shit, obviously, but it's like the time period of Grease, kind of the story of Sons of Anarchy, because you get the motorcycle gang. And obviously the Bikeriders, written by Jeff Nichols, and then Danny Lyon gets the co-writing credit because he wrote the book that the movie's based on a true story, directed by Jeff Nichols as well. Austin Butler, Tom Hardy, but you get some really other cool cameo performances. Michael Shannon's in this. What's his name? Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead. I can't think of his name. Let me scroll down here to the cast and see why is his name fucking skipping my mind right now. I can't think of it, but where is he? I know he's in here. Norman Reedus, that's it. Damn, why couldn't I think of that? I'm not sure. But also, you get a lot of others in here in the cast as well. Damon Harriman, Mike Faist, Boyd Holbrook all play good roles in this. But really the most surprising part for me was Jodie Comer kind of is the central character to the story. I know Austin Butler is kind of the draw, and a lot of the story is focused on him. But really, his love interest in this film is played by Jodie Comer. She plays Kathy. And the one thing that's going to throw you off about this movie at first is probably her Midwest accent. But by the time you get a few minutes in the movie, you're like, okay, you get used to it a little bit. Same with Tom Hardy's accent, which I was worried about in the trailer. But they both, I adjusted to them after some time. And I think for me, the kind of surprising thing about this was that it's kind of told from Kathy's perspective, Jodie Comer's character, kind of with the reporter that was writing the book, the character that plays Danny Lyon, Mike Faist, interviewing her. And that's kind of the story's like really from her perspective, more so than the motorcycle gang itself, which for me, I would have liked more for it to just kind of focus on the motorcycle gang. So when that started and it was coming from that aspect, I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to like this, but it grew on me as well, because really the heart of this story is kind of a romance between Austin Butler's character and her character. And, kind of the crux of the story is, Johnny, which is Tom Hardy's character, starting this motorcycle gang. And it kind of starts off kind of innocent or whatever. And he kind of gets in over his head a little bit. And you kind of see this motorcycle gang transition to, more of like what you would experience in Sons of Anarchy. That's kind of what you get to towards the end of this film when, the club is kind of essentially taken from Johnny, which I'll get to that here more in a minute, because throughout the film, you see, Benny, which is Austin Butler's character, and Johnny develop a really close friendship. Tom Hardy, is trying to eventually pass the club off to Benny, Austin Butler's character. He doesn't want to do this shit forever. He's trying to take him under his wing, let him take over the club, but Benny is reluctant. And then eventually comes to the point where Benny leaves, gets out, which of course, kind of be with Kathy, and he leaves. No one knows where he's at. And while he's gone, things really start going awry for the club. Johnny kind of loses his hold on things. And eventually it comes to a head with Johnny, getting challenged by a young guy that, he eventually wouldn't let into the club in the past. And then they're supposed to do this thing where it's like guns or knives. They fight it out. If you beat me, then, the club's yours or whatever. So he asks the guy, guns or knives. The guy says knives. And you kind of seen this prefaced earlier in the film when another guy challenges Johnny. And, he chooses or not guns or knives, it's fists or knives, I believe. My bad. But nonetheless, a guy, challenges Johnny earlier in the film. Johnny takes him on. So when this happens, you're like, oh, Johnny's going to take him on again, even though it's knives this time. But nonetheless, the guy actually just pulls out a gun, shoots Johnny right there in the third act. And then that kind of brings us to the conclusion of the story, which Benny finally comes back after hearing this. And really, you get kind of the two hearts of this story are the relationship between Benny and Johnny. You know, you learn how much that he, you know, cared for Johnny deep down and Johnny for Benny. And then also, of course, Benny and Kathy's relationship, it trying to bloom throughout this and Benny reluctant to let it do so. He's not a guy that wants to show emotion. And, you know, that's one thing that Kathy mentions, you know, kind of in the midpoint of this story is, you know, she never seen him cry before or anything, didn't think that he ever would cry. And then, of course, the end of the movie, that's kind of the character turn for him and kind of his story, how it changes. You know, his arc in the film is at the end of the movie, he finds out about Johnny and he comes back and he, you know, just cries in Kathy's arms, you know, kind of at the conclusion of this movie, kind of the button of it. And really, I liked that story a lot. I liked the character arc for Austin Butler's character of Benny. It was a tragic story for the character of Johnny, especially with how he kind of just started things so innocently and then what it grew to and how it ended up obviously leading to his untimely demise in this movie. So that was unfortunate, but I think, you know, when you look at it and you find out that it's based on a true story, obviously you don't know how much of this was actually taken from the real story, but nonetheless, it's definitely a tragic tale and kind of what the club then goes on to become, of course, is more like what you find in Sons of Anarchy. Of course, the film doesn't show that, but that's kind of obviously where you can tell that it's heading. So for me, I think that the story, if you're going in, you're expecting Sons of Anarchy, you're probably going to be disappointed with it because it's not as action packed as like a Sons of Anarchy. But once I realized kind of what this story was and learned to, you know, really respect some of the aspects of it, the story that they were trying to tell, I really still did enjoy it and got a lot of enjoyment out of it. There's enough action scenes to keep you, you know, satisfied throughout most of this film. But a lot of it is just kind of a character study of these characters, you know, Johnny, Benny, Kathy, but you get some good comedy in there as well. Michael Shannon's character by far, man, he was a chameleon in this. Like when I first saw it, I was like, is that Michael Shannon? Because I could kind of tell, but he's almost unrecognizable in this, and he's hilarious in this movie. And then when Norman Reedus characters show up, he's hilarious as well. So there's definitely some good comedy in this, especially for Michael Shannon. That guy, Zipko was his name in this shit, and he was awesome. I loved him in this movie. So definitely, you know, there is some action, there is some tense scenes and stuff. Don't let me sway you and everything. You'll get some blood, you'll get some fights, you'll get some knife fights. All that shit is there. It's just not there, I guess, as much as I thought it would be. And I guess I was kind of thinking that you were coming into this motorcycle club with it already being kind of the Sons of Anarchy type club versus it being kind of the story of the build up of this club and the relationship between Johnny and Benny and Jodie Comer's character of Kathy. So for me, that was a little bit of a letdown, but like I said, I really enjoyed the film for as it was. You know, it's still, I think, going to be maybe in my top 10 when we get to that list at the end of the year. You know, we'll see what happens. But for now, out of 10, I'm going to give the Bikeriders a 7. Still a solid, still a movie that I'd recommend. So that's what I got on the Bikeriders. All right, next up, let's talk about something I watched more recently, and that's Twisters. Obviously, if you're a fan of the 1996 Twister, when you saw they were making, you know, what I thought was going to be a sequel, is it though? We'll talk about that momentarily. Like I said, spoilers for these movies, spoilers here, spoiler for the next two as well. If you don't want to hear spoilers for these movies, you know, jump ahead to the end of the podcast where I'm just talking movie news because I'm talking Twisters, I'm talking Maxxxine, I'm talking Abigail, and talking spoilers for all those, just like I did for the Bikeriders. But let's talk Twisters, man. Directed by Lee Isaac Chung, written by Mark L. Smith, Joseph Kaczynski, Michael Crichton gets the credit there, obviously, because he wrote, you know, the original book that or is it Michael Crichton? I can't remember how you pronounce it. Either way, you know, he wrote the book that the original Twister was based on. You get Daisy Edgar Jones in this. You get Glenn Powell in this. Anthony Ramos plays a good character in this. And of course, I almost completely forgot until I got into the theater and he popped up. I'm like, oh shit, it's Clark Kent. But David Cornsweet, obviously, we get a good look at David Cornsweet in this movie, our future Superman, coming out next year. One of the films I'm most anticipating, being the giant Superman fan I am, being the fan of James Gunn's DCU as it continues to progress, and I'll be covering that in the lead up. But David Cornsweet's in here in kind of a bit role as well. But Twisters, man, you know, you go into this, you're kind of expecting, okay, so this is like a sequel to the original, but really it's more of a reimagining. It's kind of its own thing. There's obviously some homages to the original. You get Dorothy popping up in here. And I think the way they set up Daisy Edgar Jones's character, she almost seems like she was meant to be the daughter of Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt. And I think what I'd heard was Helen Hunt was asked to be a part of this film, but she didn't want to be because she had her own pitch for a Twister sequel that the studio kind of decided not to go with. And I guess when that happened, she was kind of bitter or what have you and wasn't going to be in this movie. But I think if you look at it, this was probably intended to be more of like a sequel type to the original Twister because Daisy Edgar Jones' character is set up to be so much their daughter. She just has those instincts that like Bill Paxton had, the extreme, as Philip Seymour Hoffman would call him in that. She kind of has that instinct for tornadoes, and she has, kind of that same attitude that Helen Hunt's character had as well. So I think that she was set up to be their daughter initially, but then when they couldn't get them back, they just kind of pivoted, because there is a point later in the film where you go to, Daisy Edgar Jones's character's mom's house, and I'm waiting on the reveal. I'm like, oh, this is going to be Helen Hunt. It's going to be Helen Hunt. It's not. It's Maura Tierney, another great actress, from back in the day that we all loved in so many movies, and puts on a good performance here. But I think that that's what originally, probably this original script, purely speculation here, but I would say Helen Hunt was supposed to show up as the mother there. Obviously, we couldn't get Bill Paxton, rest in peace to a legend. But Daisy Edgar Jones in this certainly seems like she was intended to be that for me. And then Glenn Powell, this guy's every damn way right now. You can't say that enough. And he just has great charisma, man. I know a lot of people are thinking that this, some of the reviews I've heard about Twisters are like, this plot's nonsensical. It's stupid. None of this, a lot of this stuff is, not feasible because they're driving into tornadoes. They're shooting fireworks off. The whole point of the character, Kate, Daisy Edgar Jones's character, her whole thing is trying to make a tornado disappear with some technology that she's made from the stuff they use to make diapers or whatever. But I don't really give a shit about that. If I'm going into a Twister movie, I'm suspending disbelief anyway. I think the original Twister was the same way. A lot of it didn't necessarily make sense. It's a lot of, movie jargon, movie science, whatever you want to call it. And this is the same way. But I think I'm going into Twister movie, what I want some awesome visuals. I want this, CGI in this case to look really good, and it looks amazing in most cases. And I want, some awesome action scenes that keep me on the edge of my seat. And I want to just have fun. I want to have a good time. I want to have some laughs. And I think this film brought all of that. So for me, it's one of the best films I've seen this year just because of that. It was a good time at the movies, man. No, turn your brain off if you want. Just enjoy a disaster movie, action flick, sci-fi, whatever you want to call it. But it's a good time at the movies. And that shit, when I was sitting there next to my wife, and I remember at one point there's, where a tornado going on, and I think they're driving through it and debris flying everywhere or whatever was happening. And I just look over and I'm like, this is dope as fuck. Because that's literally just how you feel, man. It's just a whole ride through the whole movie. I didn't check my phone once. It does enough to keep you entertained. I wasn't bored with the story at all. Plenty of action throughout. And like I said, it's just that really took me back to a time back in, the 90s, early 2000s, when you could just go to a movie. There wasn't a ton of messaging. There wasn't this and that. It was just, hey, this is just going to be, senseless action. Maybe it's not all going to make sense, but you're going to have a damn good time. And that's what this movie was for me. So I absolutely loved it. Daisy Edgar Jones, probably my favorite performance I've seen her in thus far, playing Kate. Thought she did a really good job. Glenn Powell, like I said, as Tyler Owens in this movie, just puts on a show, man. He puts on a show. He's so charismatic, and they have good chemistry with one another as well. The one thing I do like about this is obviously that's kind of, I think, set up for the fans of the original, because when you go into it, it starts off with the flashback, which you don't know is a flashback until it flashes forward 5 years later, which is where this story takes place. So the opening is 5 years in the past. You get the tragic story. So in a lot of ways, it does follow the same story beats as the original Twister. Kate, loses some people close to her. It's not her dad and stuff like Helen Hunt's character in the original, but it's her boyfriend, some of her close friends, and her and Anthony Ramos's character of Javi are the only ones that survive. 5 years later, she's done storm chase and she's just working at, the weather service or whatever the hell she is. And Javi shows up talking about some technology, some new radars they have to get 3D pictures of tornadoes. And that's kind of what draws her back in, is because she really just wants to help people. And that's one thing you learn about her character of Kate throughout this film, is that's kind of her main thing, is just wanting to help people. And the way they set this up, though, it's really interesting because, back in the original Twister, obviously the ragtag group was, kind of the good guys, our protagonist, and the antagonist was, Carrie Elways' crew, the guys with the nice matching black vehicles. He's in it for the money. I mean, he's in it for the money, not the science, that type of shit. And so when this starts off and you see Javi is kind of with the group that's, the more put together, the money-backed group, which would be kind of like Carrie Elways in the original. It's called Stormpar. They all have the matching vehicles and stuff like that. And you see the character of Kate starts working with them, and you're like, wait a minute. Isn't Tyler Owens and those guys kind of more the ragtag group? Like, those were the good guys in the original. Are we really going to flip this here and have her be with, what was kind of the antagonists in the original film, but they do a good job of kind of making you think that. And then, obviously, probably if you've seen the original film, you're kind of in the back of your mind thinking, oh, she's going to flip. She's going to end up with, Tyler Owen's crew. And obviously that's what happens. But, I think he did a good job of playing on that from the original as well. Because when you come in at first, you're like, wait, what the fuck? Are they really going to change this? She's going to be with them instead of the ragtag group. But, about the midpoint of the movie or so, they flip that on its head. She obviously ends up with the ragtag group. Tyler Owens and his team. If you feel it, chase it. You've probably seen from the trailers, he's got a YouTube channel. And it's just a lot of fun, man. If that was a real YouTube channel, I'd be watching the shit out of it. He's driving directly into the tornado, shooting off fireworks. And one of the cooler additions to this film was his truck with the augers that he can just drive into the tornado. He's got all these contraptions that he's set up, and he can, put these augers down and just sit there in the tornado without it getting blown away. The glass is graded for, whatever the hell bullshit movie science they say, that it's not going to blow the glass out of his truck. So like I said, unbelievable. Yes. Fun as hell. Hell yes. So, I absolutely loved that. And obviously kind of the heart of this story is a burgeoning romance between Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar Jones, Kate and Tyler. And at the end, obviously you get, kind of that romantic fulfillment of those two, similar to, the Helen Hunt, Bill Paxton relationship in the original, where they were going through the divorce. And then by the end of the movie, they come back together. Kind of similar in this movie. They start off as rivals. And then by the end, you can see the romance burgeoning. You don't get the payoff kiss at the end. I know that's been a complaint from a lot of people. It was a complaint from me originally when I was talking to my wife. I said, but that's one of my biggest complaints from this movie is just, they didn't kiss at the end. Why the hell did they not kiss? And then I seen going around this thing about Steven Spielberg's note, because you can actually find online that they did film them kissing there at the end in the end scene. But Steven Spielberg, made a note to kind of take that out. And I'm not going to question Spielberg. That's one of the GOATs. So if Spielberg says it, all right, I'll go with it. So, you don't get that payoff kiss at the end, but it still is kind of a romance story. And this movie did really good at the box office. So maybe we'll get another Twister film here in a couple years. We'll get to see these characters come back and go at this again, and we'll see what they can do with that. But overall, like I said, fun ass time at the movies. Really enjoyed it. Obviously, some of the stupid shit that I'm talking about that you need to ignore is not going to allow it to be a perfect 10. And so for me, this is still really a fun time. I give it an 8. So Twisters, 8 out of 10 for me. Definitely recommend checking that one out if you haven't already, especially if you're a fan of the original Twister film. I think you'll really love this shit. All right, next up, one that released earlier this year. I never got the chance to check out in theaters, but it's now streaming on Peacock, so you can, check this one out right now too yourself if you want to, if you haven't already. And that's Abigail. Abigail obviously brings back, Matt Bellinelli Open and Tyler Gillette, however you say it, Ready or Not directors, Radio Silence as they're better known. They also did, of course, the most two recent Scream films. Steven Shields and Guy Busick write this one. Get Melissa Barrera in the cast, coming back to rejoin the Radio Silence team that previously was attached to the Scream movies before, all the controversy with them gone. And then now, and Melissa Barrera gone as well. They do reunite for another horror movie here in Abigail. You get her in the cast. You get Dan Stevens in the cast. You get Catherine Newton from, Lisa Frankenstein, which you guys heard in an early review this year. One of the movies that I really liked this year. You get Angus Cloud here in one of his final roles. Rest in peace to that young man. Kevin Durand, an underrated actor, and Juan Carlo Esposito in here as well as Lambert. So a pretty good cast in this one. And obviously, the premise to this one, I think, is well known. A little girl that's a vampire. These people are stuck in the house with her, and she's kind of picking them off one by one. And honestly, I thought that I would like this more than I did. Really, my favorite enjoyment out of it, obviously, was the gore. They had great gore, as, Radio Silence tends to do. And the comedy. There was some good comedy in this movie as well. My favorite line from the movie, Sammy, those are fucking onions, when they're looking for garlic and she comes back in with the bag and shit. That was hilarious. I laughed out loud at that one. But I love seeing Dan Stevens in this movie. I think he's so underrated. If you've never seen The Guest, you got to check that out. That's an awesome Dan Stevens performance. And of course, here in the third act of this movie, you can see Dan Stevens be a badass vampire for, 10, 15 minutes. That's pretty fucking cool. Obviously, like I said, spoilers on this as well. But I think for me, what kind of knocked it down a little bit was obviously it's just kind of formulaic, like I said, as far as, once you find out that it's a vampire, what you kind of already knew if you watch the trailers, there's not much mystery there. And then it's just kind of waiting on, okay, who is she going to pick off next? Where's this going to go? How many of these people are going to get bit and turned into vampires? They try and throw in some twists and turns there by having, Abigail say, hey, I'm not locked in here with you, kind of like you guys were locked in here with me. I brought y'all here because y'all screwed over my father and shit like that. So they try and throw that in there, but it's really, more or less kind of predictable. And for me, it just kind of felt like radio silence going back to the well of Ready or Not, because in a sense, it really is kind of a similar story, except with the vampire aspect added in. Because if you guys remember Ready or Not, it was, after the wedding night, she's locked in with, the groom's family, and they're all after her, and she's got to kind of try and get out at the end. And, spoiler alert there, she ends up out at the end. She's covered in blood, sitting outside smoking a cigarette. At this point, in this movie literally goes back to the same well. Melissa Barrera makes it out at the end. Instead of having the cigarette, though, she's got a lollipop, but she's sitting outside, covered in blood, sucking on a lollipop. So they literally go back to the well. Like at the end, I was really thinking, this is a lot like Ready or Not, but I enjoyed Ready or Not a lot more. So I'm not saying this is a bad film. I did enjoy it. Like I said, had some laughs in it, had great gore in it. If you're a fan of horror movies, fan of vampire flicks, you'll probably like it. And the fact that we don't get too many vampire flicks, it's definitely worth a watch. But for me, that just kind of knocked it down a peg because I felt like, so they're just going back to kind of what worked before with Ready or Not, but throwing in vampires this time and a little girl. But it was enjoyable enough. I think you get great performances from Dan Stevens. He's great in the film. Catherine Newton, Melissa Barrera, all good. But the star of the film is the girl Alicia Weir that played Abigail. She was awesome. She really killed it. Had a bunch of crazy monologues. She was creepy as hell with, some of her voice, some of her mannerisms and stuff. So I think that she did the best job of acting in the movie. But for me, like I said, just kind of felt like Radio Silence going back to the well and trying to redo what they did, but just with some different little things changed up. So for me, it's a 6 out of 10, still above average and in a good time. So if you haven't watched it yet, check it out on Peacock. All right, and then the last review we're going to get into, spoilers yet again, for Maxxxine. Now, this one I've been wanting to see. Took me longer than I liked. There's still some other films I haven't got a chance to watch yet that I'm hoping to watch in the next couple of weeks. Some horror films I want to go back and catch up on, like In a Violent Nature. And then, of course, Longlegs. I still got to check that out, and hopefully I'll be able to do another one of these podcasts soon and throw a couple more reviews in there once I get some other stuff under my belt. But let's talk Maxxxine, the conclusion of Ty West X trilogy. I hadn't seen Pearl yet. Finally watched it couple weeks before I watched Maxxxine in preparation to be able to watch Maxxxine. And honestly, I was surprised because when I, knew when Pearl took place, how it was a prequel and, the way that it was like shot and filmed, I was like, I'm probably not going to like that. But as it turned out, I liked Pearl better than X even, kind of that, I guess, what would you call it? The parallel, can't think of the word I'm looking for here. I don't know. I can't think of the word. It's skipping my mind right now. I'll probably think of it as soon as I wrap up the podcast, but just kind of the two things that don't feel like they would go together. I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of to use that term, but it's like the bright colors and stuff, like almost like Wizard of Oz-esqueness for a horror movie. And those two things really just worked really well together for me. Obviously, you see David Cornsweet in Pearl as well. So that worked well for me in Pearl. So Pearl was my favorite of the trilogy, but I thought going into Maxxxine here that I'm like, Maxxxine will probably be my favorite. And I'd say through 2/3 of this movie, I was probably thinking that it may end up being my favorite because it really was awesome. You get the 80s aspect. You got the Night Stalker going around kind of as a backdrop to this film. And I think really what kind of threw it off for me is I thought that we were going to get to see the Night Stalker. He was going to factor into the plot a little bit. And I think they kind of just use it as a red herring throughout the film so that you are thinking that. And then when you ultimately come to the reveal, they were hoping to surprise you with it. And I think for me, you probably will really enjoy this film up until that reveal. And then how you feel about that reveal is going to determine how you feel about this movie. Because I've seen some people say Maxxine's the best of the trilogy. And I've seen some people that feel the way that I unfortunately feel about this. And that's that it's probably ranks 3rd in this Ty West trilogy for me. But the plus side of that is it's a really good trilogy from Ty West. All 3 of these movies are good. There's not a bad movie in this trilogy. Maxxxine just happens to be my least favorite of the 3 because of how it wrapped up at the end there with the reveal. But obviously Ty West directed and wrote this. Charlie Rowan McCain, Simon Prast, Mia Goth, Kevin Bacon, Giancarlo Esposito again. Just talked about him being an Abigail. He was in this as well. A whole list of others in the cast as well. Pretty good cast in this one. But Kevin Bacon was pretty awesome performance as kind of that private eye, that private dick, if you will. And he really is funny throughout the film. With a lot of the things he does, and he just gives you kind of that feel of a 80s private investigator. He's drinking Pepto-Bismol in the car and shit, all that, and the gore's there. It's shot beautifully. One of the best scenes is the one in the alley when Maxxxine is kind of approached by, what you think maybe, the killer of this movie, but turns out it's just, some creepy ass guy or whatever that's kind of mimicking or copycatting the Night Stalker or whatever. And she's kind of runs away like, oh no, acts like she's scared trying to get away. But the whole time she's actually just getting her gun out of her purse. And then she turns it around on that guy. She makes him suck the pistol, the tip of the gun, whatever the fuck you call it, the barrel. I guess, I don't know fucking shit about guns. I think it's called the barrel. She makes him suck that, and then she literally stomps on this man's nutsack, and you see his nuts come out of his fucking sack and roll on the ground. Oh, gave me the fucking heebie-jeebies, but that was some good-ass gore. Like I said, a lot of this movie's awesome. The stuff at the Bates Motel, the Psycho House being included because obviously Maxxine's getting into acting. She's starring in a horror movie. And so they have, those sets that they're driving through. You get to see the Bates Motel set. You get to see the Psycho House. And really, it's kind of more so, I think, what was disappointing about this for me and maybe some other people as well, as I think judging by the trailers and going in this movie that we thought it was going to have like a giallo influence or at least be some type of slasher film. And it's really not a slasher film. It's more of a crime thriller, whodunit type of film. And so with it being set up that way, it really is dependent on, like I said earlier, how you feel about the reveal. And when you get to the third act of this movie, because the tension's all there throughout, like I said, 2/3 through this movie, I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm waiting. I'm like, who the fuck is going to be this killer? Like, what is this motive and stuff? And for me, when that reveal comes, the motive I didn't care for, and then the killer I didn't care for. And because you come to find out it's Maxxine's father, which I guess they kind of set that up with the cold open of this movie with, her being on film and her dad, giving her this little speech or whatever. So maybe I should have known that was coming, but I wasn't really expecting it. But it wasn't one of those good surprises. It was one of those for me where I'm like, oh man, that's it. It's just her dad. And he's a religious, freak trying to convert, satanic Hollywood or whatever as he called it in the film and stuff. And so for me, that didn't really land. I don't like that aspect of it. I don't like that that's the direction that they went. And then also it just kind of felt lackluster to me that it was her dad. I was hoping to at least get the Night Stalker in. And really, like I said, it just kind of serves as a backdrop in this film. And you don't really ever get to see the Night Stalker involved in this plot. For me, if you're going to tease that, I would love to see him be involved some way. Maybe she gets attacked by him or somebody in the film gets attacked by him. I know that I'm guessing Ty West just tried to use it as a red herring. But for me, that kind of knocked it down a bit. But like I said, still a good movie. Like I said, there's not a bad movie in this X trilogy. Just for me, I'd rank it third on that trilogy. But I really did enjoy it, especially for the first 2/3 of this film. But overall, when we come to the end here, got to shout out Mia Goth, another great performance in this, just like she did in Pearl. Can't forget to mention that. But when we came to the end here, I think for me that reveal just kind of dropped down a good bit. So for me, I give Maxxine a 6.5 out of 10. Still above average, still a good movie, but definitely, like I said, my least favorite of the trilogy. I'll go 6.5 out of 10 for Maxxine to wrap up the reviews here on episode 9 of JC's Pop Culture Podcast. Now let's talk some film and TV news, and we got a few things to talk about. Comic-Con just went down. Marvel fucking made a huge announcement at Hall H that's pretty polarizing. Either people are absolutely loving it or people are absolutely hating it. It's really no in between. It's been pretty much 50-50 from what I've seen. And then also we got some TV news to talk about on the DC side and some other things as well. So let's get into that now. All right, let's not bury the lead here. Let's kick it off here with the MCU shit. Right here from the Hollywood Reporter. Obviously, you probably know about this yet, but if not, Marvel unveils grand plans for Avengers Fantastic Four during Supersized Comic-Con panel. And, Marvel kind of had a good-ass weekend this weekend. Deadpool and Wolverine comes out. They reveal some big shit here at Hall H during Comic-Con. And so, obviously, it had been rumored that the Russo brothers were going to return to direct the next 2 Avengers films, which already had some people thinking that Marvel's desperate, these last, phase or so hasn't really gone that great and shit. So they needed to do something to kind of right the ship. So like, hey, let's go back to the well. They did it for us, starting with Winter Soldier on and really, obviously hammered it home with Infinity War and Endgame. Let's go back to the Russo brothers. Let's get them back. So that was shocking enough. But the most shocking thing, of course, let me pull this one up here from the Hollywood Reporter because it's got the great picture of the reveal. Kind of broke the internet last night. Robert Downey Jr. back as Dr. Doom for 2 more Avengers movies. Obviously, people have been wanting Robert Downey Jr. back, but they were hoping that he would show up maybe in Secret Wars as Iron Man again. But he's coming back and he's playing Victor Von Doom. The main hero in the past is going to be the main villain now for the next 2 Avengers movies. And to me, I'm personally in the camp that I love this shit just because I think it's so groundbreaking that when have we ever seen that? When have we ever seen somebody be the hero and then, turn around and be the villain of the Avengers as well. That's pretty awesome. It's a heel turn that I haven't seen since, fucking Hulk Hogan dropped the leg on Macho Man and joined the NWO and shit. It's like that equivalent type shit, that back to those WCW days. And it's pretty cool. But people's complaints obviously are, a lot of the complaints are coming from people that are huge fans of Doctor Doom, who've been waiting on that character for years. He's one of the most beloved Marvel villains. And so they're thinking, we're going to get Doctor Doom now, but it's going to be a variant of Tony Stark or whatever, which obviously it probably is. So I understand that complaint as well. But, I'm just excited about it because to me, the last phase has felt so lackluster. And then now this is just shocking and groundbreaking. And I think it's like, whether you love it or hate it, it's got everyone talking about the MCU again, which is something that they weren't doing here recently. So for me, I think it's a big move for Marvel. It's a bold move for Marvel, and hopefully it pays off. But I don't doubt that RDJ is going to kill this shit. And I think the people that are doubting it, once they see the performance and hopefully how Marvel does this thing, that I think they'll be happy with it, because I think at the end of it, you're still going to get your official, solo, like real Victor Von Doom before it's all said and done. I think that this variant's going to be the villain in these next, couple Avengers movies. But then I think there's going to be a bit of a reset after Secret Wars, and you'll still get, a traditional, more comic accurate Victor Von Doom down the line. Obviously, people are probably pissed they're going to have to wait for that. But also, in the meantime, I think you're going to get to enjoy an awesome ass performance of RDJ playing a villain. It's going to be sweet. So, Robert Downey Jr. back as Doctor Doom for 2 Avengers movies, set to return to the classic film franchise as Fantastic Four villain Doctor Doom in the newly titled Avengers Doomsday, coming out May 2026, and then he'll be in Avengers Secret Wars coming in May 2027. So obviously, there's the big change. It was previously the Kang Dynasty. Now, with Doctor Doom involved, no longer Avengers of the Kang Dynasty. It's Avengers Doomsday, not to be confused with the death of Superman. Kevin Feige also confirmed the Russo brothers will direct these next 2 films. Obviously, that's, kind of the big thing there is the Russo brothers back and Robert Downey back. So, and then you get some quotes down here. Robert Downey Jr. said, "New mask, same task." Downey was revealed in an almost religious ceremony as about 24 olive-robed men with metal Doctor Doom-like masks walked on stage. And then the Russo brothers said, if we're going to bring Victor Von Doom to the screen, he's one of the more complex characters in all of comics, potentially one of the more entertaining characters in all of fiction. If we're going to do this, then we're going to need the greatest actor in the world. And, I'm in that camp as well. I don't know if I would say he's the best actor in the world, but for me, I'll take Robert Downey Jr. over anyone to play Dr. Doom. I just think he's going to absolutely kill it. A lot of people are saying, oh, he could have got Cillian Murphy, could have got, whoever, all these other names floating around. But to me, I'll take RDJ over any of the other names that I've seen. So that's another reason that I'm one of the people that's actually excited about this announcement. But hey, that's just the way that I feel about it. I know it's pretty polarizing. If you feel differently and you're watching this on YouTube, let me know why in the comments. Love having some interactions with you guys, getting to chat this shit up a little bit. But it's definitely big news for the MCU. And speaking of MCU news, here we are again from the Hollywood Reporter, also coming out of Comic-Con. We get the official title of the Fantastic Four movie. We've talked about, the cast here in the past on the channel, but now we've got the title, and it's going to be the Fantastic Four First Steps is going to be the title of the new movie. Michael Giacchino, who won the Oscar for his score for Up, was announced as the composer. He's done some great work as a composer, so I think that he'll have, a great score for this movie, obviously. And we know it's going to be a period piece taking place in the 1960s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to get this next year, July 25th, 2025. Matt Shackman set to direct. You get Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic, Vanessa Kirby as the Invisible Woman, Joseph Quinn as the Human Torch, and Ebon Moss-Baccarat from, The Bear and Nosferatu TV show as the Thing. Excited about all those, casting. I think it's good stuff. So we do get to know the title of that film as well. And, kind of my prediction here for this, I think that now we know, and they've announced that RDJ is going to show up as Doctor Doom in the 2 Avengers movies. I would not be surprised to see him, maybe pop up at the end of this or pop up in a post-credit scene for this Fantastic Four movie, kind of along the lines of how they did with Thanos, set him up, a little bit in Guardians of the Galaxy before he eventually came in. I think that I would not be surprised to see him pop up in some capacity in the Fantastic Four First Steps, now that we know the title of this movie and we know when it's coming. It's something else to look forward to if you're a fan of the MCU. And then, of course, something more near and dear to my heart, not to say I don't love Marvel as well. I love them both equally. Well, I don't want to say equally. I definitely prefer DC. But I do love, anything superhero, anything comic book movies, I'm probably going to check out. But DC's near and dear to my heart because I grew up, huge Superman fan and a Batman fan as well. Those were always my two main characters. So it's always been DC for me. And, having that, I was really excited to see the new DC Studios logo going back to the classic look here. The logo graced comics and other works for nearly 30 years before it was retired in 2005. DC's bringing it back. The Milton Glaser design logo. DC is going into the future by looking into the past. You see here from the Hollywood Reporter, the DC Bullet, as it's commonly known as. So there will be the logo you'll see in the new DC Studio stuff. And they also unveiled a little clip of the classic, like Fleischer Superman breaking through some chains and kind of one of the first images, video images here using this DC Studios logo that I'm guessing we'll probably see before maybe Creature Commandos. It'll be on there, but we'll definitely see it in the 2025 upcoming Superman release that we're still looking forward to in the near future, which unfortunately didn't get anything out for it at Comic-Con. James Gunn said he just felt like it was a little bit too soon, but probably won't be too long in the distant future. We'll get a trailer for Superman, and I can't wait for that. We'll definitely do a trailer reaction for that one here on the channel, but I did get the DC Classic logo back. That was a bit of news there. And of course, sticking with the DC news here, the Penguin, we finally have the release date for it, but we don't have to wait long either. September 19th, we're going to get the Penguin series on Max. Can't wait for that. So it's they released a new Comic-Con trailer there at San Diego Comic-Con. I'm expecting Robert Pattinson to show up in this. It's been rumored. Likely, my best guess is probably won't show up towards the end of the series, but I think that this is going to be awesome. And I think, let's see if they mention here in the article, I believe this takes place like a week after the events of the Batman movie. 8-episode series premieres September 19th, 2024, coming from DC Studios now, obviously. Kristen Miliota will be playing the female lead of Sophia Falcone, the daughter of Carmine Falcone. John Turturro, obviously played Falcone in the Batman movie. In the series, Sophia is fighting with the Penguin for control of the city, is kind of the synopsis that we get here. Renee Feliz, Michael Kelly, Soro Asdalgo, probably butchered that, I apologize. Deidre O'Connell, Clancy Brown, and Michael Zegan also star, of course, alongside Colin Farrell, who's playing the Penguin. Craig Zobel will direct the first 3 episodes. He directed The Hunt, which is a movie I'm a huge fan of. Lauren LaFranc will write and showrun the Penguin spinoff, which picks up after the events of the movie. Matt Reeves executive producing, obviously. So excited for this one, man. Taking place right after, the Batman. I think it's like a week later the series picks up for this 8-episode series, and we get to see Colin Farrell back as the Penguin. Unrecognizable as Colin Farrell, but awesome as the Penguin. So super excited for September 19th and this series to premiere. Let's keep it in the superhero realm here. This time, though, we're talking about The Boys on Prime, a show that I enjoy. This season wasn't my favorite, this most recent season, but at the end of it, we do get some good news here that came out at Comic-Con, and that's Vault Rising, which is going to be a spinoff featuring Soldier Boy, Jensen Ackles' character previously in The Boys, which if you watched the new season, you probably saw that tease at the end and was wondering what that's about. This is what it was about. Vault Rising, Prime Video orders The Boys prequel series starring Jensen Ackles and Aya Cash. So it's a prequel here about Soldier Boy. And I kind of like what Prime's doing now, because not only do you have The Boys, you have Gen V, and they're doing, season of The Boys, season of Gen V, season of The Boys, which the next season of The Boys is believed to be the final one, but we're going to get Gen V between then, and also going to get the Vault Rising show now, where we get to see more of Jensen Ackles as Soldier Boy, which is something I really enjoyed. Thought he was really cool with that character. Kind of the comments here. We're excited to bring you the next deranged series from the world of The Boys. It's a twisted murder mystery about the origins of Vault, which is cool. You get the origins of Vault, and you get a murder mystery aspect set in the 1950s, early exploits of Soldier Boy, and the diabolical maneuvers of a soup known to fans as Stormfront, who was then going by the name Clara Vault. We cannot wait to blow your minds and trouble your souls with this salacious grisly saga, drenched in blood and Compound V. Executive producer Eric Kripke and series showrunner, executive producer Paul Grelong will serve as the showrunner there. No plot details other than that. Little synopsis, and Jensen Ackles and Aya Cash. Of course, Aya Cash returning as Stormfront, but definitely, got another thing coming from The Boys that sounds interesting. I like the murder mystery aspect. I like, the period piece setting. It'll be a switch up, for the kind of The Boys universe, but it'll be cool to get Vault Rising with Jensen Ackles back. And the last little comic book news I've got here, comic book movie news, I guess I should say, is Spawn fans. This one's for you. This one's over here on Bloody Disgusting, which I think that this is going to be interesting if this turns out right, because obviously the last Spawn movie didn't turn out the best, but going for the King Spawn storyline is great because that's obviously more of one of the more darker, one of the more gritty ones. Hopefully will be gory, but what holds me back a little bit about being excited is the fact that Blumhouse is involved. Recently, Blumhouse had some big misses, man. They really just, I don't know. Blumhouse came out of the gates hot, a few years ago. And then now more recently, it's just dud after dud, if you're asking me. So hopefully this will be something about them, returning maybe to form. But King Spawn, they're hunting for a director from Blumhouse, will be producing this based on character created by Todd McFarlane. The Blumhouse script was written by Maxxxine, Malcolm Spellman, who did Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Scott Silver, who did some work on Joker. So that's good, but they're still searching for a director. After finding a director, the team will then approach studio partners. So definitely not 100% a go yet, but they have a script. They're looking for a director, and then if they can get, some other studios tied on with this, we could probably hopefully get a Spawn movie that should be good. Should be. Keyword there. Blumhouse, like I said, holds me back a little bit, but we'll see what happens with King Spawn moving forward. If there's any other news on it, try and report on a future episode of JC's Pop Culture Pod. And the last little pieces of news I've got here are horror adjacent, horror movies and horror TV shows. One of those being In a Violent Nature. The sequel is in development at IFC Films and Shudder. They unveiled a teaser poster. This is one I haven't yet got to watch. I'm hoping to try and watch this week, maybe finally watching A Violent Nature, and then I'll put out a review hopefully on the next episode of JC's Pop Culture Podcast. No, it was another one that was polarizing. So, it was obviously, inventive, from the killer's perspective, but a lot of people were like, this shit's boring. That's one of the reviews I've heard. So I'm hoping I don't fall into that camp, but I have heard, some people say that, but other people really enjoyed it. And I think enough people enjoyed it for it to warrant a sequel. So that's what they're coming with, a sequel to In a Violent Nature. There is a poster for it there, as you see that they have released. So Johnny, the bloodthirsty killer of In a Violent Nature, is headed back to the woods. They put this out at Comic-Con as well. So if you're a fan of In a Violent Nature, you're going to get the sequel here to In a Violent Nature, which is kind of a riff on slasher icons like Jason Voorhees from the Friday 13th. They say the camera stays with the killer, trapezing him through the woods as he searches for his next victims. I'm excited to check out the original now, and now I'm even more wanting to, because now I know a sequel is coming, so I'm going to have to watch it before I can watch the sequel. So, In a Violent Nature, I'll probably be reviewing it on an upcoming episode of JC's Pop Culture Podcast, but there is a sequel coming down the line. And then how about a reboot of another 90s? This wasn't 90s, right? It was early 2000s. I think it was late 90s. I'm pretty sure. I Know What You Did Last Summer, which I'm a fan of the original. The sequels, obviously not as much. The second one, it's not as good as the original, but I did like some of the aspects of it. Jack Black was funny as hell in it. It was pretty corny. The third one, I don't think I ever made it through that piece of shit. But nonetheless, we did get the cast of the new I Know What You Did Last Summer movie, the reboot. They've been talking about this for a while. They at one point said, Freddie Prinze Jr. and Jennifer Love Hewitt were both attached, and then they both came out and said, hey, no one's even talked to us. We're not attached yet. So we do get the cast, though, and it seems like they're kind of following in the footsteps of, what Scream did, having this young cast and hopeful to get back some of the legacy characters as well. Seems like they're trying to go that same route, which, however you feel about it, obviously, a lot of people call it a Scream knockoff. It still had Kevin Williamson involved, but I always enjoyed that first I Know What You Did Last Summer movie. So for me, I'm like, I'll check it out. I didn't watch that series they did. I thought it was garbage. Tried to watch an episode, couldn't get into it. Hopefully they do a better job with this attempt at a reboot, especially if they get some of the legacy characters back. I think it'll be more successful to at least get people into theaters to watch it, and hopefully it's halfway decent then. But as far as the cast, you get Madeline Klein, as you see pictured there, from Outer Banks. You get Camila Mendez from Riverdale. So they're going to be leading that alongside Sarah Pidgeon, who has been in Gotham, Tyreek Withers from Atlanta, Jonah Howard King from, I guess, the live action Little Mermaid. And then last heard, both Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr. were in negotiation to potentially star alongside the fresh new faces. So hopefully that comes to fruition, because I think, obviously, the Outer Banks connection, the Riverdale connection is going to bring in some of the younger audience. But I think if you want to bring in people my age and people that watch the original, you're going to want to hopefully get those legacy characters back, or some people may not tap into this, but we'll see what happens. The franchise will return to theaters on July 18th, 2025. The model for the new take is the 2022 Scream reboot. It's kind of what I assumed there, which saw members of the original cast mix it up with young up-and-comers. Jennifer Kate Robinson is on board to direct the new installment. She directed Do Revenge. This is coming from Sony with Leah McKendrick writing the original draft of the screenplay. However, an updated draft was written by the director, Jennifer Kate Robinson, and Sam Lansky. Obviously, the original was written by Kevin Williamson, directed by Jim Gillespie, based on a Lewis Duncan novel. The film spawned sequels in 98 and 06. The 06 one is unwatchable. Hopefully, Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr. Do come back, but not too many plot details other than that, and knowing the cast and hoping that Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr. make a return as well. But we do know we're getting an I Know What You Did Last Summer reboot coming out in 2025. And then the last piece of news I have here is from Bloody Disgusting yet again, but it's on the TV side of horror here. And this is a show that I've really enjoyed. If you haven't checked this out, man, go watch the first 2 seasons of From. This show is awesome. But season 3, I've been waiting on it. When are we going to get this? Because I knew it was supposed to come out this year. We hadn't heard a ton about it except for, some coming soon posts they dropped on their Facebook page. But then finally they drop, a trailer recently, and we get the premiere date, get the announcement of some new cast additions at Comic-Con as well. And as you see here, September 22nd is when we'll get season 3, 2 new faces this upcoming season. Robert Joy and Samantha Brown will join the cast. Samantha Brown was in Chucky. Robert Joy was in The Hills Have Eyes. They join the ensemble cast. Joy will play Henry, a curmudgeon to whom the years have not been kind, while Brown will play a Costa, new to the force police officer who was in over her head, which is interesting to me how they're bringing in new characters because, obviously if you know the plot, it's, people kind of stuck in this place that they can't get out of. So I'm guessing maybe just a couple new people come into town somehow and get stuck there as well. That's about the only thing I can think of. Like I said, they did drop a trailer there below. The series unravels the mystery of a nightmarish town that traps all those who enter. I don't want to spoil too much about it, but if you haven't watched it, go watch it. It's from some of the same people that were tied into Lost, which I never got a chance to see. But obviously I know it's a pretty revered series. But nonetheless, I think that it's really like Lost if Lost was horror. So, they're kind of stuck in this place, don't know how to get out of it, but there's monsters that come and attack, at night and stuff. That's the best way I can describe it without getting into too many spoilers. But if you haven't yet, watch the first 2 seasons before September because we got season 3 of From coming, and that'll wrap up the movie news and shit. And I'll get ready to wrap up episode 9 of the podcast here as well. All right, so there it is, guys. Finally brought back JC's Pop Culture Podcast. No, it's been far too damn long, but I'm going to try and do it more often now. Throw in some movie reviews, talk about some movie news and shit, just like I had been before. But definitely, the College Football 25 video game has been taking up a lot of my time and a lot of space here on the channel. But definitely want to keep the movie reviews and stuff coming as well. And down the line, and this podcast here will be where the home for those will be. But, if you haven't yet, hop over to the YouTube side of things. Check out my videos on College Football 25 if you're a fan of that game. And if you are tuned into this podcast episode on YouTube, do me a quick favor, hit the like button. If you haven't already, that really helps a shit ton with that YouTube algorithm. And, of course, if you're a fan of pop culture, who's not? Whether it's movies, comic book, horror, comedy, all those are right up my alley. So if they're up your alley too, hit the subscribe button. Really helps this channel continue to grow, and you can hop along for the ride here on JC's Pop Culture, where I talk about that and about the EA Sports College Football 25 video game. And I really appreciate it. If you're tuned in on the audio side, you can find it anywhere. Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. Just search for JC's Pop Culture Podcast. Share it around. Tell your friends that enjoy, movie reviews as well, and they can take in this content. And I'd really appreciate that, man. But hey, that's it for me. JC here. Appreciate you guys tuning in here to this episode of JC's Pop Culture Pod, up to episode 9 now. Going to keep them coming in the near future. Just got to check out some more movies, get some more reviews under my belt, and we'll come back here. I'll review them, and we'll talk some more movie news, guys. Having said that, I appreciate you tuning in this one, and I'll catch you on the next one.